one of the very first notions of the design was to put the bones back into the earth. The artifacts that they were finding, the paleontology that was going on, the science and discovery around it, led us very quickly to a very simple idea of putting a building into the earth, putting the bones back into the ground to their rightful place in the earth, and giving people the experience of kind of the container that these artifacts were coming from, getting back into the earth and being part of the earth.
Growing up and going to school in Eastend, both of the hallways that went past the grade 12 room were all lined with fossils that Corky Jones had collected. He was a self-taught paleontologist and to some extent an archaeologist too, and you could always find him out walking in the hills looking for fossils or archaeological sites. And a lot of the sites that are being excavated even today are sites that Corky had identified, or they're in areas where Corky had identified were rich with fossils.
You know, 65% of our provincial resources of fossils is in the southwest corner of the province, which allows us immediate access to that stuff. I can take an hour's drive around Eastend and hit 75 million years of history. And because we have that immediate access, you know, the province benefits from our discoveries and maintaining these non-renewable resources. The process of finding a fossil is, we depend on erosion of the hills by wind, rain, and snow to expose these bones for us to find, so we can see them. That same erosion destroys the fossil, so that's why they're non-renewable. If you find a fossil that's laid out in the middle of a hill, you know, 2 years later it'll be totally destroyed by erosion. So we're always battling time to find and collect this stuff, but at least they're safe for future generations to work on and prepare and put back together again.
When the Eastend Community Tourism Authority was formed, we were officially formed in I guess the spring of 1988, but previous to that we were just a group of concerned citizens that were trying to get the community to look at ways to keep our small town alive. And we were trying to come up with what we needed, what would attract tourists to Eastend and make it a tourist destination. And the number one thing in that whole study was the creation and marketing of a paleontology museum in Eastend.
We drove up here with the key members of the building committee, the representatives from ECTA and the town. And the first look at the property here told us that this was the place for the building to be. They wanted something more than just a container. They wanted something that was going to be a destination for people to come to Eastend and really experience the community, and to be able to bring people up the hillside into the natural prairie, and to have the overlook of the Frenchman River Valley and some of the unique features of the area. Really made this a destination location.
So this site on the north side of the valley was identified. It was really the nucleus of a 10-member board. This was always our first site. Our first preference was up here. The view of the town and the valley is spectacular from up here. You can see numerous geological formations from this side of the valley, which makes it excellent for programming.
I think the interesting thing about the site is that it does overlook the community, and the nature of the building, that little sliver of glass that overlooks the community, like sort of like an open eye that coming out of the hillside. I think it really is a very significant distinguishing feature, probably the most distinguishing feature for Eastend.
One of the really significant discoveries in Saskatchewan is Scotty, which is the partial skeleton of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. That created a lot of interest, both nationally and internationally. Certainly a lot of press for an interest in the Eastend area, the whole southwest of the province, and of course for the Royal Saskatchewan Museum.
When I first started moving the hill back above the layer of the bone that was still in there, within 5 minutes of exposing that new bone, I hit across a tooth, a T-Rex tooth. There was no, you can't mistake those things. And when I really got excited at that point, because T-Rex teeth are essentially, 8-inch daggers. They're single roots, they're long daggers. When the animal dies, those teeth often shoot out in the water, in the river or stream that it's died in, or died around. They don't usually stay within the jaw. So when I found the teeth in the jaw, it signaled to me that there was some sort of trapping mechanism that held this T-Rex together, which meant there was more than likely more of the T-Rex behind the hill. And that all happened to me, that realization happened in about a couple of seconds. And then I stopped and I took a walk, had a cigarette, swore a bit, which I normally do when I find something, because the next realization is, how are you going to get this thing out? Not only do you have to remove tons of dirt, usually by hand, you then have to try and wrap a 40-foot animal in pieces and get it out of there. We usually name our big animals, just out of quirkiness. And it usually has to be a unanimous group decision of who's collecting it. The only thing unanimous that happened that night between the 3 collectors, including myself and the landowner, is that we drank a bottle of scotch. And hence Scotty got its name. Science stumbles proudly on. The discovery brought a lot of excitement because, number one, we hadn't had a T-Rex skeleton found in Saskatchewan. We had found pieces of T-Rex in Saskatchewan, but never a skeleton. So this is our first. And also remember that at that time in 1994, there were probably only about 12 half-decent skeletons of T-Rex known. So in terms of a rare dinosaur, but yet one of the most popular dinosaurs, this was truly unique. There was a lot of media attention, but the community group at the same time recognized the importance of the discovery, and within a very, very, very short time, I don't think any other community could have done so that quickly, arranged a tour operation company, a group, to manage the eventually 6,000 to 8,000 people who came out there to that site in 1994.
Our little community was sort of taken off guard because they hadn't seen that kind of activity, especially tourist activity. I mean, tourism is relatively new to our community, and the T-Rex really kicked it off. There were people, you would go into the cafe and there were no seats to be had in the cafe, and local ranchers who would come in, or farmers would come in to have their coffee at Coffee Row would look at all of these people sitting on their stool, having coffee. Actually, our dream was a whole lot bigger than what we have now. Again, our 10-member community group, seeing what was happening in Drumheller, and 500,000 people visiting that community, and the economic spin-off that was coming of it. But when we took that first idea back to our community, to public meetings, to get our community input, the community said, well, we don't want stoplights and street lights in downtown Eastend. We want to try and preserve our way of life, our rural character. So go back to the drawing board and see what is feasible. We knew for this building to be successful, the Royal Saskatchewan Museum had to be the scientific partner in it. They're the stewards of fossils in our province. So it was key that we knew what they needed in a facility from their side to make it work, and then what we needed as a community group to make it function economically. So when we started trying to come up with the size of a building and who it would attract and how many would it attract and what kind of people it would attract, that's when we really started to get into coming up with a structure of a building of the size we have now, which is about 16,000 square feet. The board's vision all along, especially after we had toured the head smashed in buffalo jump in southern Alberta, and how it is excavated into the side of the hill, that building something into the hill was probably our best way to go. Very little, as far as building maintenance, we have Tyndall stone on the front and glass to wash. The building is built such that it faces south-southeast, so it gets the maximum sunlight in the summer. And again, in the wintertime, we get the maximum sunlight when the sun is lower on the horizon. It's built into the side of the hill, so it's completely covered with earth, so it's economical for cooling and for heating. And it was just the best choice.
The process for this project, in terms of our selection as the architects or as the design team, is very similar to most project selections. There's no design work done until you're actually selected to do the particular commission. They selected us as an architectural firm based on our previous experience. They had no notion of what we were going to present. And so after they selected us, we came up with the idea. It's not considered professionally ethical for an architect to walk into an interview and say, "This is what your building could look like." I mean, that's not done. You know, what we have in terms of our design skills and other professionals have as their skills, you don't give that away and then say, well, you know, if you like it, you can pay for it.
One of the very first meetings we had with the larger group, we had expected about 20 people to come to a bit of a visioning exercise to talk about what the center could be. In fact, we had about 75 representatives from the community show up, and input from local business and from the scientists and paleontologists and the community tourism group was extensive throughout the exercise. Creating a program for the building that would really celebrate all of the components of the science and tourism and discovery and exhibition that were part of the ultimate vision for the facility. Bob and I, after our first visit to the site, had lunch in one of the local diners, and the very first design concept sketch was developed that afternoon over lunch, literally on the back of a napkin, that showed a simple glass eyebrow on the hillside, buried in a building buried into the hill. It was from that very simple sketch and that very simple diagram that we developed what we have here now.
The research capacity of the T-Rex Discovery Center has certainly been a big plus to the work of the Royal Saskatchewan Museum, because it provides us with a facility near the fossils, gives us a lab and what have you to work out of.
The lab is extremely spacious. Again, because of our location here, that we operate it year-round. Our one technician here, Wes Long, has a fair amount of space to work on stuff from, you know, fossils from the size of a pinhead to multi-ton blocks, with the aid of natural light. Historically, paleo labs were always in basements or on main floors, hidden away, because of the weight factor of some of these skeletons that we were working on. But to be able to bring stuff into a lab, a spacious lab like this, and have so much natural light to work with is extremely unique in paleontological labs in North America. And we helped create the logistics of the shape of the lab, and generally we're extremely pleased with it. Yeah.
Putting a building in the ground to the extent that we did contributes to a great extent to its efficiency. It's you know, a good portion of the building is below the frost line, so you know the cold Saskatchewan winters don't drive into into all of the corners of the building. But because of the laboratory aspect, there's a lot of air changes in the building. Because it's a public assembly space, there are a lot of air changes. So the energy efficiency was a challenge in terms of being able to balance the various systems within the building.
The work that's going on here in the lab portion of the building is really part of the exhibit, and is part of the experience that we wanted people to be able to share and to not have it be secretive or behind closed doors.
Yeah, we have, at the centre, we have a really state-of-the-art laboratory here. It's it's a beautiful facility. It's a curtain of glass on both sides, and the inside curtain enables our visitors to view the paleontologists in action. In the summer, sometimes they're out in the field, but often they're in the lab preparing fossils. Scotty is still ongoing. He's still being prepared here, and it gives people an opportunity just to see how fiddly and how time-consuming paleontology prep can be, and that adds another dimension to that lab. Is currently run by the Royal Saskatchewan Museum, and of course that relationship we have with the museum provides a lot of the scientific integrity for the centre.
They wanted at least a partial glass view so people can look into the lab and see our activity going on, and which is also part of the education process. People do have the sort of the misnomer of when you find a fossil, you just pick it out of the ground and it's fully mounted and has a label underneath it. It's a very long process to prepare and put the stuff back together again. So that's part of the education. Having that window there allows people to see that this is a very tedious, time-consuming, and challenging craft.
The combination of tourism and educational opportunities these days is becoming more important. People are traveling, but they're not just, they're not as willing just to travel for the sake of enjoying themselves, although obviously that's important, but they're really looking to learn something new. And here it's really, the goals of this centre is really to engage people in learning about paleontology. We don't intend on being a museum in the sense that we're a trophy room of dinosaurs. Really it's to engage people in how scientists learn about paleontology, what we know about paleontology from the fossils and the rocks that we're studying, and how that's transferred into our knowledge of ancient history, and bringing that to life, making it more accessible for people.
What the community is doing here is promoting what's the fossil resources that are around here. By establishing this facility and having an arrangement with the Royal Saskatchewan Museum, they're able to bring in the scientific expertise to do that interpretation at one level, and by themselves, with the gallery and guides, interpreters, be able to present that to the public, which means the resources and interests remain local. And one of again, we wouldn't be here if not only historically most of our resources are here, but in the future our fossil resources will be in this part of the province.
The building, I think, draws as much attention in some respects as the exhibits and the T-Rex does. So I think that's a good thing. Yeah, it's great to see contemporary architecture in a place that you wouldn't normally expect to see it. And I guess one of the most frequent questions we get asked is, well, how did they build the centre, and how did they get it into the hill? So we're often telling people they moved the hill, built the centre, put the hill back.
Contemporary architecture, I think, is interesting from that aspect. That being that the actual architecture becomes why you went there. And as an architect, I guess I'm flattered that people see architecture as a tourist destination. I think in the case of T-Rex, though, it's quite different. The architecture was not why the visitor, the tourist, was going to come here. The visitor was coming here to see a specific exhibit, and the architecture is set up not to detract from that. The architecture is dead simple. It's very elegant. People might think it's very ingenious, but it's not. It's pretty simple. How do you bring people into a cave? Well, you have an opening, and in this case, we put a window on it. Reflectivity of the glass was very critical to the final architectural design. If it was totally transparent, I think it would be far less successful because it wouldn't be as much of the landscape. But on a bright Saskatchewan blue sky day, it's a bright blue building. When it's a dull overcast winter day, it's a dull overcast. So it really works with the environment that it sits in, and it speaks to what's happening that day. And from one day to the next, one season to the next, the building is quite different, as the natural environment is quite different.
It was a dream of a lifetime to be part of this project. From being a community member when it first started and sitting around, lots of times it was sitting around someone's kitchen table or sitting in the local tavern after meetings, or to have a meeting to come up with ideas on how we could keep our community alive, to seeing an architectural rendering of the project, to taking the community and getting the community's feedback that it was the majority of the community wanted us to proceed down this line to make the community a tourism attraction, to seeing the cement being poured, windows going in, displays coming in the building, and all the interaction from all the people that came together to make the project a reality. Have we added economic benefit to our community? Definitely. There are pottery studios, there are bookstores, the artisan community has flourished. Certainly visitors from all over the world that are walking through the door in the facility are now partaking in some of those other activities in town that are making our existing businesses viable all year round. And we're now seeing people saying, oh, what a beautiful community. And they're coming back and they're buying residence in our community.
The building has been recognized and acknowledged by our peers in the design community. It received a Award of Merit in the Saskatchewan Premier's Design Awards program. It was recognized in the National Post Design Exchange program, which really was a design competition recognizing the contribution architecture can make back to communities. It's been published in the Canadian Architect as well as other local journals.
Of all the buildings I've worked on, you have sort of your 4 or 5 really special buildings that you have in your career, and this is certainly, I don't want to rank my top 5, but this is certainly in my top 5.
We wanted something in the hill. These fossils have all come out of the earth, and now they're back underneath the earth again.